Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Azure Infrastructure Weekly Update. It's the 7th of October and we're somewhere a little bit different. So yes, we are here for the Azure Weekly Update and I am in Kona, Hawaii for the Ironman World Championship. I am releasing this a little bit earlier than normal because Saturday I'm racing and Sunday probably won't be in a fit state to post any videos. I do have the chapters and it's a super light week this week, which I'm super grateful for, so I can get this done while on vacation very quickly. So I am here in Kona, Hawaii. It's my first time. It's awesome. So hey, there's me, my numbers on the wall and standing in front of all the posters. I got to meet some of the greats. So Jan Frodeno, he's like 3-time world champion, Olympic gold medalist. Dave Scott, the man, a 6-time champion. There's me in my bike gear, and there's me watching the Women's Championship, which was yesterday. And we went on a manta ray trip, and I just saw the most amazing rainbow I'd ever seen. So yeah, I thought I'd share that. I did pre-record a video before I came out here, just talking about the Azure VM isolation options. If you think about dedicated hosts and just VMs that are so big they take up the entire host, I go through those details. What's new? So now there's an Azure Firewall Basic SKU that's in preview. So this joins the existing Standard and Premium. This is really aimed at small and medium-sized companies. It's a fixed 2 VM scale. So it does have high availability still. It has a 250 megabit per second throughput limit. It still has network and application traffic filtering, but it doesn't have filtering based on, for example, threat intelligence. It will alert you, but it's not going to filter if it's from some known malicious IP, some known malicious domain, but it's still managed with that central Azure Firewall Manager. UltraDisk is now available in China North 3. Remember, UltraDisk is that lowest latency, most performant type of managed disk. I can set the capacity, the IOPS, the throughput separately, and I can even dynamically modify the IOPS and throughput while the disk is in use. That's super useful if I have different requirements at different times of day. And obviously, if I can optimize the performance, I can optimize the money I'm paying. On the database side, so Query Store Hints is now available in GA for Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL MI. And this is really when I want to manually optimize the queries beyond what the standard query optimizer execution plan is doing. Now, normally that built in that standard query optimizer execution plan is the most optimal. But sometimes it's just not the case and I want to manually optimize, and maybe I don't have the ability to change the application code to modify the transact SQL to actually inject a query hint. So with the query story hints introduced in SQL Server 2022, I can actually shape my query plan through my SQL Server Management Studio or Azure Data Studio. I reference the query ID and then store that hint, which will then get utilized. Miscellaneous. So Azure Backup Smart Tiering to Archive is now GA. So this is for Azure Virtual Machines, and then SQL and SAP HANA in Azure Virtual Machines can automatically move eligible and for just VMs recommended recovery points to the archive tier. So the whole point of the archive tier, remember, is it's much, much cheaper. But if I have an incremental, it gets converted to a full when it moves it to archive. So it's going to take up more space, but it is cheaper. So if I have a VM with a very high rate of churn, then that conversion to full will not be a big deal and will make sense. If it's very small amounts of change, you're going to want to really think about that. But as part of the backup policy, I now have this option to use the tiering and then use that recommended or eligible. Now, to be eligible for an Azure VM, it has to be older than 3 months and with more than 6 months retention left. If it's the SQL or SAP HANA, then it's only fulls that have a minimum of 45 days and at least 6 months left. Azure AAD Conditional Access has a new option. Instead of just saying, hey, I want MFA, I can actually now say, hey, I have a certain required strength. So if we look at this super quickly, normal conditional access, you can see over here, hey, I have this just require multi-factor authentication. But now we have this new require authentication strength. And if I turn off regular MFA and instead turn on this authentication strength, you see I actually get to pick from some options. So I've got this multi-factor authentication, which is basically that same anything, or passwordless multi-factor authentication, so like Microsoft Authenticator app, or phishing resistant, like a FIDO2 security key. So I can be more specific about what I want. And where they actually come from is I can define my own. So if I go to authentication methods and authentication strengths, hey, I can see those three options right here, but I can actually go and create my own. So if I had some very specific requirements, I can go and create those. So if I actually say, hey, a new authentication strength, I can give it a name. Then I can go through and I select all of the options that I want to apply, and then I can use it in my conditional access policy. So I'll do a whole video on this when I get back, but that's a really cool new option. And then the last update, Azure Virtual Desktop now has single sign-on and passwordless authentication. I think this is like the most requested feature, but I can get a single sign-on experience for my Azure AD Join, my hybrid Azure AD Join session hosts when using Windows and web clients. I can get password authentication to sign into the host with Azure AD, passwordless authentication inside the session when using the Windows client, and I can even use third-party identity providers. That's Windows 10, Windows 11, and Windows Server 2022. And that was it. So again, super quick, but I still wanted to get you updates even though I'm out here on vacation. But until next video, everyone, take care.